الأخوات والأخوة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أرحب بكم، أرحب بالأخوة الحاضرين وبمتابعينا عبر وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي في كل مكان إلى هذه الندوة المسائية التي نستضيف بها الدكتور عزمي بشارة للحديث عن ما سمي في الإعلام بصفقة القرن، وما نسميه نحن حسب عنوان الندوة صفقة ترامب نتنياهو لتصفية القضية الفلسطينية. هذه الخطة التي تأجل الإعلان عنها أو عن شقها السياسي على الأقل عدة مرات خدمة للأجندة الانتخابية لرئيس الحكومة الإسرائيلية بنيامين نتنياهو، وحيث أعلن طبعا الشق الاقتصادي منها في شهر حزيران من العام الماضي، وتمثلت في انعقاد ورشة المنامة التي حاولت طبعا تجنيد أكبر عدد ممكن من الدول لتنفيذ الشق الاقتصادي من هذه الخطة التي تم الإعلان عن شقها السياسي طبعا الأسبوع الماضي. طبعا دكتور عزمي بشارة.
دكتور عزمي بشارة needs no introductions. He is a thinker and a researcher, and he is the director of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. He has many books. I can remember a few in the last few years. For example, the Egyptian Revolution, his book about the Tunisian Revolution, the Syrian Revolution, his latest book on sectarianism, popularism, and his book about ISIS, which was an attempt to provide a critique and understanding on how this phenomena came to existence. I'll give the floor now to Dr. Azmi Bishara. He'll be giving us a historical perspective of the U.S.-Israeli plan to liquidate the Palestinian question. And of course, from the point of view of what was revealed of the peace plan, which was announced last week. Thank you very much, and welcome, and may the blessings of God be upon you all. I don't know where to start, in fact, because this was such a momentous event which may lead to consequences of enormous magnitude. And of course, I hope that I will take about an hour. If you persevere with me, I will be dividing my talk into three parts. First, I'll talk about the plan itself, which was called the Deal of the Century. Its official title is Trump's Vision. The second part will be, in it I'll be alluding to how we got to where we are now, and the path of the Palestinian self-determination and national liberation movement. Before I start with the first part, which will be an analysis of the plan itself, I would like first of all to start by mentioning the American initiative so far. This particular plan is a disconnect with all previous plans and initiatives. All previous plans were building on each other. There was some sort of a historical accumulation. The administration, and especially after the collapse of the Soviet bloc, tried to play the role of a mediator and come up with initiatives as a superpower, albeit an ally of Israel, but as a superpower nonetheless, which can play the role of an honest brokered from their point of view. First, I'll mention Camp David accords with Egypt, and then the other developments until we got to this current peace plan, which starts from square one, really. And despite that, previous initiatives were also biased towards Israel. The first initiative after the 1967 war was the James Rogers' initiative. And Rogers was the U.S. Secretary of State under President Richard Nixon, which was proposed in 1970, William Rogers, in fact, which included according to Security Council Resolution 242, the initiative included the necessity to recognize Israel and return the occupied territories to Jordan, Egypt, and Syria. Israel rejected this initiative because it did not pay enough attention to Israel's security needs and didn't provide enough guidance for Israel's occupation. And some of the new genius thinkers nowadays are saying that they always say that the Arabs reject and the Israelis accept all initiatives. In fact, this initiative did not deal with Palestine. It don't even recognize Palestine. All what it dealt with was mitigating the effects or impacts of occupation. Right from the start in peace talks, I'm not talking about liberation or anything. Israel was rejecting part, and the Arab side, this pact was said in Khartoum. I'll speak later about when Arabs get together, but when Egypt and Jordan accepted this initiative, now I'll jump 7 years from 1970 to 1977, when Brzezinski, who was National Security Advisor, proposed the plan of self-rule in the West Bank and Gaza, on the condition that this self-rule would be linked to Jordan. Until that day, this was an Israeli proposal. There was a debate within Israel between two sides, the Igal Alon camp, which used to call for territorial compromise with Jordan, and Moshe Dayan was the defense minister, who proposed a functional compromise that we will not return any lands but share control. This was functional compromise vis-a-vis functional compromise. Later on, when Camp David's deal was cooked by Moshe Dayan when he visited Morocco, and you know the details. Then the Brzezinski plan, as we said, but please pay attention to what is said. Israel rejected this initiative because Carter did not provide any guarantees for Israel. Even the self-rule or autonomy was rejected by Israel. I hear a lot of nonsense of late from some Arabs. They're always floating the idea that we have these problems because the Arabs always said no. I remember the UN representative who was, I forgot his name, he said the problem of Arabs are they are too willing to please. Their problem is not they reject, but they accept too much. So therefore, Israel also rejected this proposal. Now I move to I will skip the Camp David Accords, which was signed by the late Egyptian President Sadat, and I'll try and come to the deterioration in the Arab situation which led us into this Trump deal. And also in the Camp David Accords, the idea of self-rule for Palestinians was mentioned. Now I move to 1982, the Ronald Reagan Peace Initiative, so-called Ronald Reagan Middle East Peace Initiative. And the framework for that was to establish self-rule or autonomy for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. Also here, autonomy or self-rule was mentioned by Brzezinski and Camp David and Ronald Reagan's initiative. No talk of an independent state. Of course, this self-rule was conditioned on it not being any threat, not constituting any threat to Israeli security, and to be linked with Jordan. Some ideas said for 5 years. Nobody approached the PLO at that time. Of course, the PLO rejected this because nobody even approached them. They were completely outside the picture, so they were not considered as a side to this. Reagan rejected also. The Israelis described the Reagan initiative as an initiative which was born dead or born still, and also Israel rejected this initiative. We come to the biggest change after the Kuwait invasion, which changed many things. And when I view the history of this area, we have 1948 war, 1967 war, and the Kuwait invasion. The huge mistake committed by the Iraqi regime, which invaded Kuwait and put an end to the Arab system. Here, George Bush Sr. announced his vision of peace in a speech to Congress on 6th of March 1991, based on the 338 and the principle of land for peace. And he sent James Baker with his shuttle diplomacy, and James Baker's chief of staff in these trips, shuttle diplomacy, which led to the Madrid initiative, was Dennis Ross, who was a Zionist rightist person. And despite Dennis Ross's advice, James Baker insisted on going to Madrid without PLO attending. The Palestinian side was represented by a delegation from Gaza and the West Bank, and consequently there was a secret parallel path to Madrid was established without the United States. The importance here is that this path was without the participation of the U.S. I don't know whether it was without the knowledge of the U.S., I don't know, but it was without the participation of, although I doubt very much that Norway would not attempt such a thing without America's knowledge or acquiescence. Anyway, in Oslo, in Norway, without the United States, a path to peace was opened with the PLO. This path put an end to the Madrid track and started an Israeli-Palestinian negotiation under the leadership of the PLO from the Palestinian side. This track I will come back to in the second part of my lecture. I hope you can persevere with me. I'll not talk about what the Oslo track led to, but I will go to the roadmap, which was presented under George Bush Jr. in 2002 to 2003. This is the third or fourth American initiative. This is George W. Bush. This is very important, really, that we should understand the psychology of the American conservative camp. George W. Bush announced for the first time in the American foreign policy the idea of a Palestinian state which can live side by side in peace with Israel. Emanating from this vision, I'll come back to it in more detail later on, the roadmap was aimed at ending the 1967 occupation and start a Palestinian state. In October, then the American administration offered unofficially the roadmap for peace plan to the both leaderships, the Israeli and the Palestinian and the Israeli. The Palestinian leadership accepted without any reservations. As for the the Israeli government, it accepted it in principle, but made its acceptance a condition on making 100 changes. At that time, I was a member of the Knesset. The Israeli leadership called for 100 amendments. They said, we accepted it in principle, but we have to make 100, no less, 100 amendments. Who was prime minister at that time? Ariel Sharon. What did he do after the plan? He decided, in order to foil this plan, and he decided to unilaterally withdraw from Gaza, to disengage from Gaza. People thought he did it to get rid of the headache, but he unilaterally did what Israel thought was good, because the George Bush plan started with two things. With a war this was in the second Intifada. Sharon started a military campaign against the Palestinian Authority, which led to occupying areas B and A. They reoccupied these areas, and he unilaterally withdrew from Gaza. At the same time, in 2005, getting rid of a big problem represented by Gaza, and applied a blockade or siege, and he assassinated Yasser Arafat. This was his response to the roadmap. Yasser Arafat, who accepted George Bush's roadmap with no alterations or amendments, was assassinated. As for the person who accepted it in principle with 100 amendments, received a letter of guarantees from George Bush guaranteeing Israel's security after occupation. I have all the details of the roadmap here. I will not go into the details of that. We come to the Obama era, the Obama reign of power in 2009 till 2017. President Obama, in his first lecture in Cairo, he said he will start a new era and he wants peace, and he will devote time, and he will make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and his patience will not run out. But his patience soon ran out, and his attention was diverted to the Iranian nuclear deal. And later on, John Kerry continued this. John Kerry, before he came to the State Department, in a lecture in Washington, he blamed the previous administration, the George W. Bush administration, because he did not pay any attention to the Arab peace plan. This was before the Brookings Institute said, we have all the Arab countries together offering a peace initiative, but the administration paid no attention to that. Later on, he became Secretary of State. An attempt was made to bring together Abbas and Netanyahu in the White House in 2010. This attempt was not successful because Netanyahu refused to freeze settlement activities, and then, practically speaking, Obama left the peace process altogether, and he initiated John Kerry to take care of things, and he diverted his attention to the Iranian nuclear deal. He knew that what John Kerry will do will be no more than theatrics. There will be no real progress achieved. Obama called for a Palestinian state on the West Bank borders. Then it was announced that peace process will be initiated again, and the PLO at that time applied to join the UNESCO, and Israel, of course, refused any attempt by the Palestinian National Authority to join any international organizations, and they lifted the freeze on the settlement activity because the PLO applied to join the UNESCO. Then the Secretary of State continued in 2013. This is John Kerry coming up with various initiatives. And in his program, I have a plan of 6 points. I'll only mention point number 4. It's important to find an acceptable solution for Jerusalem as a capital and recognize capital for 2 states. So he considered Jerusalem as a capital for the 2 countries, and of course all the rest of the plan focused on providing for Israel's security needs. Now, to appease John Kerry, and in attempt to respond to John Kerry, who wanted a Palestinian state, but he called for the Ariel, Maali Adumim, Gush Etzion, all these blocks of settlements on the border. As he said, there should be land swaps for that, so that these can be kept by the Israelis. And also the Arab League held a meeting and amended the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, because John Kerry called for all the Arabs to meet, like when they called for all the Palestinians to get together and change the PLO charter. Even the Arabs who rejected the plan, they amended the Arab peace plan in response for just an initiative by the American Secretary of State. They really retreated and went back on all their historic positions in return for a peace initiative which was meaningless. Israel is accepted. This was the introduction. Because in the title we said a historical perspective, I gave you this historical narration of what happened. Now, the United States, despite its bias to Israel as a superpower, they try to appear as if they respond to the needs of people who were occupied by way of an armed robbery style of things, and they were sent to exile throughout scattered throughout this earth. I think President Trump now went back to the Jackson era of the 19th century, that this was really going back on the United States historical positions as a superpower. First of all, he gave this initiative, the reins of this initiative, to a band of 4. One of them he had to, maybe because he is his son-in-law, his son-in-law. The others, Jared Kushner. Anyway, I don't want to go into much details about him. He is a real estate developer. He said he read 25 books. I tried to imagine what kind of books. Maybe he read stuff written by Netanyahu or Bersovich, Perez. There is 25 books of this type. He said he read 25 books about the Middle East. I wanted to add some comics, but this is all what I found. And for the last 2 years, he's been taking the lead and meeting presidents and leaders, acting as a leader. This is incredible. The humiliation the Arab nation has reached is of unbelievable proportion. Anyway, David Friedman, he is a settler himself. Yes, he is formerly a Trump lawyer. There is an illusion that Trump is a successful businessman. In fact, he declared bankruptcy 4 times, and he has specialized lawyers representing him in that. David Friedman himself, he is a settler and a donor to settlements. We think that he played a major role in formulating this peace plan with others like Jason Greenblatt. Trump didn't consider him a failure enough. He brought Avi Berkovich, who was an assistant. These are the band of 4 who are behind this. Vanity Fair said he's the coffee maker or the tea boy. Maybe this is what we deserve in the situation we are as Arabs. We deserve tea boys charting our future. Anyway, we can say what we like now. We can say what we like about them, but from their point of view, they did the right thing. First, they know the situation, the reality of their, which does not need 25 books. They read the situation of the Arabs. Secondly, they did not go to announcing the plan. They start with implementing it gradually by sending out balloons to test the waters. And first of all, on the 6th of December 2017, they decided to implement the decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital, which is implementation of the Jerusalem Embassy Act of 1995, which was approved by the Congress in that year. Recognizing, of course, then in 1995, it was decided that this decision should be implemented by May 1999. But all American presidents since 1995 did not implement it. But Donald Trump said, no, we are a democratic state, and he is a Democrat by nature, so he should implement the Congress's deal. We see now what a Democrat he is, so he moved his embassy to Jerusalem. What matters to us, when he did that, he said, everybody warned me that the world will turn upside down. I moved the embassy, but nothing happened. And this is, of course, this applies truly to the Arab world. Our brothers here in the Gulf and others, they said, we will wait till the deal of the century. This was the deal of the century. Everything else is just talk. This is what is written. The moving of the embassy and recognizing Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel is the deal of the century. The same year, Trump announced, Mike Pompeo said that the United States does not consider Israeli settlement as illegal or a violation of international law. What does this mean? What does this mean that when the US says that the settlements are not illegal, this means they don't consider them as an occupied. They can be a violation of international law when they are recognized as an occupied territory. But when you say Judea and Samaria are part of Israel, what does that mean when they say this is not a violation of international law? Therefore, this was important. By Pompeo was no less important than what the other four have been saying. He is no less a rightist extremist than they are. Now I'd like to go back to I want to go back to America's position historically vis-a-vis settlements. Despite all the bias, it was different. The United States, for example, did not use the veto when 446 the Security Council voted to consider the Israeli settlement activity as an obstacle to peace and has no legal basis. That settlements are an obstacle to peace and they are illegal. In 1982, after Reagan's position in support of Israel and announcing his support, Ronald Reagan was not he was not a politician as such, his history, but he had an administration which advised him. He said something that at the time when Israel can take the necessary steps to fulfill its military needs in the occupied territories, that building settlements does not comply with international law. This is Ronald Reagan, who was not a leftist or a liberal. His term was the beginning of the right. He was like Thatcher in the UK. He was the beginning or the start of the rise of the right wing. For this reason, they condemned the Israeli settlements as an obstacle to peace efforts. But they allowed, although they allowed Israelis to build as part of the natural growth of the settlements. This was George W. Bush's expressed opinion or position. And also here, this is a change in the American position, an important change that George W. Bush did, but it was a turn to the worse when he started dividing settlements between legal and illegal, as if to say that not all settlements are illegal, some are legal, as if to say that the Israeli court decides that. So if the Israeli court decides, then the Israeli law applies. When the Israeli law applies, then this is a turn to the worse. All the settlements are illegal, and this is not something which is determined by Israeli law or courts, but international law. In 2009, the situation has changed when Barack Obama came to when he said building settlements, freezing settlement building is not just a desirable thing, but it's a condition. for peace. So there was no previously such position to make a condition that freezing settlements is a condition for peace. You know, Obama, in fact, when Obama said freezing settlements, he sort of made the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, stick to the same condition. When Obama gave up this condition, poor Abbas appeared as someone who continues calling for the same thing. The United States used the right of veto because they were still hoping that peace. This was in 2016, towards the end of the Obama term, when he realized that there is no hope, when he expressed his disappointment or anger with Netanyahu. And you know the famous Security Council thing, when the Americans did not use the veto and settlement was condemned, and John Kerry started talking at the end of the Obama era. The administration reached a conclusion that Israel does not want peace. For this reason, they decided not to use the right of veto, or in other words, to condemn settlement. And they announced that John Kerry said Netanyahu and Israel are responsible for the failure of his efforts towards peace. There was a statement by Obama which is important because it was given to the Israeli television. He said Benjamin Netanyahu's policy supporting settlement makes it impossible to have a Palestinian state in the future. Here Obama was talking to the Israeli audience. As when I say now, Pompeo's statement reminds me of something, that there was not only a change in the American position, historical position, but it was a disconnect from all previous historical positions. Now we come back to Trump and the steps he has taken. First of all, moving the embassy and considering Jerusalem as capital. Then came the ending all the financial support to UNRWA, and the American finance was really represented third of the budget, which is $1.24 billion. What does this mean when you stop funding UNRWA in politics? The UNRWA is not an NGO. The UNRWA is not a civil society organization. This is a decision established after Resolution 194, the right of return resolution, and many other resolutions. Every year it was reiterated that the right of return to Palestinian refugees, and every time the United States voted for that, the representative of the United States government always voted for this. And also UNRWA's establishment was established by the United States voting for the resolution, which means the United States recognizes that these are refugees and they have a right to return. When they decided to stop funding to UNRWA, this means they think there is no such thing as a refugee question. Of course, there was the other step of closing down the PLO representation office in Washington, because recognizing the PLO was part and parcel of the Oslo Accord. So they torpedoed the entire peace process by closing down the PLO mission in Washington. We can revisit this when we talk about the Camp David. This is not done stupidly. They think they are a group of people who think in a rightist, Zionist way, like the Israelis think, settlements, refugees. By the way, settlements mean borders to the refugees and the Jerusalem. These are the permanent final solution, part of final solution. So therefore, when the Palestinian president angrily says, "What should I negotiate for?" Abu Mazen, when he gets angry, he's usually right, because he is right. What can he negotiate for? There's nothing left. Now we come back to the vision itself. We read some parts of it now by way of analysis. I think the most important aspect in Donald Donald Trump's vision, which in fact it's a deal between Trump and Netanyahu, and it has a lot of calculations for elections, and both suffer from political uncertainty, and their grassroots are similar in thinking. In my opinion, what can be concluded, the main motive in this deal is, first of all, and the international repercussions, is what is forced on reality will be reality, will happen, because it's like saying might is right. If the Asians can hear us, Europeans can hear us, this precedent, when everybody said in the international law before that territories belonging to other parties cannot be annexed by force. What they are saying now, no, this can be done. It's not this. The principle that applies is not the might of right, it's the right of might. This is the first thing. The second thing is, this of course applies to Trump's vision in everything else he does, when it comes to the environment, to free trade, others. The right is to the side of the one who has the might to force it. Second point is to adopt the Israeli narrative, including the biblical one. This is a precedent which we'll come to in the analysis, but in fact there is total acceptance of the Israeli narrative, including the biblical narrative. Of course, the biblical narrative involves the unseen, believing in the metaphysical aspects too. The Israeli right did not want to waste the opportunity of Trump being in the Oval Office to achieve the maximum. Now they took the legitimacy of things nobody gave Israel any legitimacy. They got the legitimacy now from the United States at the Palestinian level or Arab level. Now they should know that there is legitimacy now from the United States to what the Israeli right is trying to achieve. I think these are three main points. Now we'll come to analyzing the vision itself. Trump's vision, of course. First of all, the first striking thing is the tone of colonial guardianship, which reiterates the language of the 19th century, that there is the question now of mandate, and there are peoples who should be prepared and educated before given. You need 3-4 valiant tablets to finish reading the entire text. You really need tranquilizers because you feel insulted. There is a lack of tact, in fact. The Americans are not like this usually. The Americans are polite people. they try to say we are not like Europeans, we are not a colonial power. They could have been more polite in the discourse because the discourse of language is a colonial language. It's really very provocative to Arabs, to Muslims, to third world people. Really, you feel it's a very provocative language. Israel will have practically total guardianship over the occupied territories. Israel will keep the security responsibility over the state of Palestine until, or with an aspiration that the Palestinian can be responsible or will be responsible for as much as possible of their internal security of Palestine. We are talking about the internal security. We're not talking about the borders, the crossing, and the space, etc. Israel has the overall responsibility over security until the Israelis are responsible for their own responsibility. Then the state of Israel will work diligently to minimize its security involvement according to the condition that the more the Palestinian state can do, the less the state of Israel can do or should do. So in other words, if you're good boys, then you can take care of their own things, your own things inside, internally only. Of course, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan will help. The Jordanians responded to that. Another text says, if the Palestinian state fails in any aspect of the security responsibility and fulfilling all of any of the standards, security standards or benchmarks, then the Arabic translation is poor, actually. It's not our translation. They use the term footprint here. So, should the state of Palestine fail to meet all or any of the security criteria at any time, the state of Israel will have the right to reverse the process outlined above. So Israel decides. Another text, how we should educate ourselves. Also, of course, peace can never flourish in an environment where the education system does not encourage that. So therefore, the promoting a culture of peace, they talk about our education standards or criteria, but there is never mention of any of the Israeli educational system or textbooks. With all the, I read that, I presented more than 1,000 proposals in the Knesset. Always the Arabs are treated with the stereotype of being shepherds, traitors. The Israelis are the doctors and engineers, as well as many other races. And when you have any opinion polls in Israel, you see like 60 or 70 Israeli percent of the Israeli, you think the Arabs are dirty and they should be expelled as a result of this educational system. The other point is to implement the Israeli narrative literally, as if it is, this even includes the biblical discourse that as if God is a real estate agent, gives them any lands they want, without mentioning even once the Palestinian narrative. All the suffering is mentioned here as the Israeli suffering, and also Israel has to give no mention of the word Nakba or Israel or Palestinian suffering under occupation, always you find that the Palestinians suffer as a result of their own policies, not the Israeli occupation. The text also tells us that for Judaism, Jerusalem is where Mount Moriah is located, and when Abraham nearly sacrificed his son Isaac, and God intervened. This is from the days of Abraham, when from that day onwards, when God didn't allow Abraham to sacrifice his son, Jerusalem became the capital of Jewish states, as if in those days there were countries, states, and capitals. You have to look up in dictionaries, when did the first capital first appear? And it became the political center for the Jewish people. You're talking about 4,000 years ago, when King David united the 12 tribes of Israel. This is a political document presented by the United States of America now. When King David united the 12 tribes of Israel, making the city the capital and spiritual center of the Jewish people. And when the King David built the first temple on Mount Moriah, and according to the Jewish tradition, when God revealed to Moses at Mount Sinai, I can't believe this. When the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians in 596 BC, then the second temple was built until the Romans destroyed in the year 70. But Jerusalem did not lose its holiness, etc., etc. They say there are 700 mentions of Jerusalem in the Torah, in the Old Testament. They say the Holy Quran has no mention of the city of Jerusalem, only Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, but there is one sentence, however, that the Prophet Muhammad made his night journey through Al-Aqsa, and the Umayyads took care of Jerusalem. I don't have enough time to go into much details on such religious affairs, but the mainstream in the Jewish, the Zionist secularist trend does not recognize any of this. David Ben-Gurion and others do not recognize any of this. They created a capital without Temple Mount or anything. Until 1970, it was not their capital. And the Jewish agency said Jaffa should be a capital because of its importance. People, he said, this trend, the religious Jews who believe in this are the same who believe that a state should not be established in Israel before the return of the Messiah, because this is interfering in God's work to start a Jewish state. This can happen when the Messiah returns. So therefore there's a contradiction from all sides. You know my position. The religious is not a political argument, and it should not be. This is my principled stance. Religion should not utilized for political reasons. But even from a religious point of view, this is not correct. Any religious Jew will tell you the religious affair also does not allow people to the Temple Mount before the return of the Messiah, because this will be a desecration of a holy site. Now things are so confused. The secularists use religious arguments. Trump uses religious arguments, but this is different. How can we accept this as a document? They talk about Salafis. Isn't this Salafi thinking? Now, so far as the narrative itself. Please pay attention to this. No country should be asked to harm the security of and the safety of its citizens. Of course, this applies especially to the state of Israel, and because Israel was forced to have the bitter experience of withdrawing from territories. Now Israel is playing the role of the victim, and this is the Israeli narrative. So in 1956, Israel waged war. In 1967, in Israel, they call it defensive war. It was an Israeli aggression. Nobody attacked Israel before. The only war which was initiated by Arab in 1973, in the opinion of Chomsky, was in defense of their own occupied territories. But they did not attack Israel. They attacked the territories which belonged to them, which were occupied by Israel. So all political thinkers who are reasonable will tell you that. The entire document, ladies and gentlemen, has not even once a mention of the word occupation. So what are we talking about? If you do a search now, withdrawing from territory captured in a defensive war. So Israel is withdrawing from territory captured in a defensive war. They are not occupied, they are captured. In Hebrew, there is a term, we know their terms. They call the occupied territories they translated this as capture, as to take hostage or in prison. In Hebrew, it's ahzakim, which means areas held and not occupied until peace negotiations are conducted. There are areas captive for the sake of peace. In other words, I've taken these territories to force you to make peace. So the people who wrote adopted the Hebrew language. They exactly use that and say capture territory in the offensive war. Although in 1967 is known to everyone as an aggression by Israel. They attacked the Arabs when they were not aware of it. It was a total surprise. So the word occupation, if you we found one word was occupation that it's to do with occupations. The word is there, but not as occupation of land, but an occupation by way of jobs and professions. In analyzing this text further, the language, if you go beyond the first and second part, the language becomes the language of real estate developers. It's obvious that people who wrote this was written by real estate developers. Here, they always talk about providing help for the Palestinians for the construction of restaurants, shops, hotels, cultural centers. They cannot escape their reality as real estate developers. So, I mean, you can look for yourself. Like will identify financing for the construction of restaurants. They want to build as restaurants for us. Restaurants. It's written specifically. Real estate development, shops too, malls, hotels, cultural centers, and other tourism facilities within this zone. Now I come to something apart from linguistic analysis, the fallacies the fallacies contained, which are planted in the language and the discourse of this. First, you have Israel did what it had to, withdrawing from territory captured in a defensive war in a historical rarity. And now they're talking about 1967. So I, as Palestinian, should be pleased because they withdrew from Sinai. He said they occupied this land in 1967, then they withdrew from 88% of it. So you Arabs be happy, that's it. Israel withdrew from at least 88%. The 12% remaining is the Golan Heights, the West Bank, and Jerusalem, of course. Also, the other fallacy here, the conflict led to the problem of Arab-Israeli conflict, created both a Palestinian and Jewish refugee problem. So a similar number of Israeli refugees were also expelled from the Arab lands shortly after the creation of the State of Israel. So therefore, there should be a mechanism away from this peace plan to compensate the Jewish refugees. Of course, there's no mention of the Zionist movement which pushed people to leave the Arab countries. And those who came to Israel or went to other countries, they deserve compensations. People in Morocco and Tunisia should be prepared now. In addition, the State of Israel deserves also to be compensated for the costs that it has borne as a result of accepting the Jewish refugees. But first of all, let's not. Israel calls them Olim Hadashim, newcomers, not refugees. So therefore, the State of Israel and the Zionist state is built on this principle. It's not called refugees here. They are called, well, they are at the heart of the principle upon which Aliyah, which means ascending, the opposite of descending. So an immigrant to Israel is someone who ascends to Israel. Whoever leaves Israel is called Yureid, or someone who descends, not ascends. This is the language they use. They are not called refugees or immigrants. They are newcomers. They are the builders of the country. Nobody forced the Jews in Morocco to leave Morocco. This is a lie. This is a fallacy. In fact, the Zionist movement, the Jews from Yemen immigrated in 1930s, not in 1948. They brought them as laborers. The only case where there is some sort of expulsion is in Iraq, maybe. There was some expression or some form of an attempt to expel them from Iraq. And it was proven that some hand grenades were thrown at Jewish houses of worship. Mordechai ben Borat wrote a book. He said, I did that. The Zionist agents did that, and this was part of the activities of the Zionist agency. Of course, the Israelis now try to convince us that you have refugees and we have refugees. I think any Israeli will consider it an insult if it's called a refugee. They came because they are honest They came to build this country because Palestine had no Jewish majority. They built Israel by bringing Jews from the outside and expelling Palestinians from the inside. These are fallacies and nothing but fallacies. As for the right of return, we mentioned this. The deal of course, these are not our translation, it's their translation. The text says that all calls for refugees or right of return, no right of return will be given to any Palestinian refugees in Israel. This is categoric, clear-cut, clear language. Maybe in the days of Rabin said we will consider that people who physically left Palestine 1948 and are still alive then, maybe aged 80 or so, will be allowed. But now, according to this, what they consider all the original refugees who physically left, not their descendants, not their second or third generations. This text says no return whatsoever. But in the presentation, I didn't delve into much details. But they say the refugees who do not have a permanent place of abode or residence, we can allow them through a committee, a joint committee, Israeli-Palestinian committee, to the territories held by the Palestinian authorities, taking into account the ability to absorb them and Israel's security needs. The rest, the Muslim countries should be convinced to accept 5,000 Palestinian refugees per year. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about this document only, but there is a lot to be said to some Arab countries so far as how to deal with the Palestinian refugees. This is another matter. Some Arab countries think that the Palestinians should be kept in a refugee camp or in a ghetto so that they do not forget Palestine. No, a Palestinian can be a university lecturer and still remember Palestine. And this is all not to settle them. This is forcing them to immigrate to Scandinavia, Canada, instead of returning to Palestine. Talking about settlement, resettlement is a lie and is a form of racism. When you keep the Palestinians in ghettos like chicken, what they do, they escape through illegal means to reach Canada or Scandinavia for a better life. That's why some Lebanese politicians, when they speak so angrily about this deal, they worried about the 100,000 or so Palestinians. They want them to go to Scandinavia. But Syria at some stage and Jordan tried at some stage to make the Palestinians live more decently. But this is just an observation on the margins of our talk. Another fallacy, look at this fallacy. The Palestinians in the state of Palestine that will be given to us, the state of Palestine will benefit from special access to certain designated facilities at the state of Israel's Haifa and Ashdod ports with an efficient means of exporting and importing goods into and out of the state of Palestine without compromising Israel's security. We already now use the ports of Ashdod and Haifa. So what's new? Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank, where do they export and import things? From these two ports, Ashdod and Haifa. We are under occupation. When they say, I'll allow you to use the Ben Gurion airport, what else can I use? Give me a port in Gaza or an airport in Gaza, I will not use Ben Gurion. These are just fallacies. They are blatant fallacies. They are taking people for fools, and you feel insulted. We are a little bit smart, at least. We can read, we can write. Do they really think they can take us for a ride by this? Palestinian people are very experienced and seasoned people now. They cannot be easily fooled by these things. Also, and the final fallacy, the state of this, please pay attention to this. The state of Israel and the United States, this is a Freudian slip by them. The state of Israel and the United States, not just why suddenly the two together? They wrote them together. Why did the United States choose Israel to think together with? The state of Israel and the United States do not believe. The state of Israel is legally bound to provide the Palestinians with 100% of pre-1967 territory. I believe that is consistent with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 242. This vision is a fair compromise and contemplates a Palestinian state that encompasses territory reasonably comparable in size to the territory of the West Bank and the Gaza pre-1967. Sometimes your patience runs out when you read this. What are they saying? They say, we'll give you back some territories. If you put them together, it will be just a little bit under 100%. We'll give you some areas in the Negev, which are desert. These three green zones to the left. This will be good. Through a land swap in the desert, they'll take, with this, if we added the total of these areas with the areas still in the hands of the Palestinians in the West Bank, it will not make up 100% of what Israel has occupied. Because Israel and the United States do not think that it should be 100% anyway, because Resolution 242 does not stipulate that the territories occupied, but territories or lands occupied in 1967, without the article the. Territories, now they say territories occupied in the recent conflicts. Territories occupied in the recent conflict in English. Why didn't they use the territories? Because when you say territories occupied in recent war, because this will separate it from other wars. When you say the United Nations demands that Israel should withdraw from the areas occupied in 1967, not the other territories occupied in other wars. So this distinction is to distinguish. There is no need for the, because it's already, the two issues are separated. There's no need to any explication or explanation. So in the French text there is the, in the English version there is the, in the French version there is the. This is another fallacy. Now, there is another even more beautiful fallacy here. part of the land swaps, the so-called triangle, which are, well, the Arabs of inside Palestine, which is 15 villages, now have become, some of them become towns like Taibe, At-Tiri. This will be included in the land swaps. Israel wants to give these villages or lands to the Palestinian state. Ladies and gentlemen, these are territories Israel occupied in 1948, and according to the truce with Jordan, they should have returned to Jordan in 1949. But Israel kept it, and with the passage of time, this became a reality or a status quo in violation of the lines of these ceasefire lines, and the Palestinians who became citizens of Israel, some call them the Arabs of Israel. I think the Arabs of Israel are in other places, not far away from here. These are the Arabs of Israel. These lands should be returned to the Palestinian Authority. What's the purpose? This is a very small, narrow strip of land. But in fact, they what think about is the number of the Palestinians, 350,000 Palestinians, starting from the Ara Valley in the north, southwards to close to the sea line. Kufr Qasim also is very important. There is, you will not remember all the names, but I visited them. I visited them village by village. I know them all. 350,000 Israeli citizens of Israel. Israel wants to get rid of, so therefore they included in land swaps. They are not land swaps. This is a transfer. They are getting rid of them. This is a demographic cleansing to keep the Jewishness of the state of Israel. This is another fallacy. Now, within the land swaps, you reveal your racist inclinations. When I was in Palestine, I was asked this question in the media, in debates on the media. I was asked this question. You expected a trap by the Israelis. When you say no, you don't want to be returned, they say, you want to stay in Israel. You don't like to go back to an Arab country. If you say yes, then you say you have no rights. So if you say yes, you fulfill their transference. I used to say yes. If you return the Galil and the triangle here, and look at the map on the left and the area in yellow, this is the partition. What is included in the Palestinian state is the entire northern part. So if you really want the Palestinians in Israel to join the Palestinians, go back to the 1947 partition of Palestine, and there's no problem. Then we can go to. You just want to get rid of the population and keep the land and do it according to your own whims and desires. I did not invent this resolution 147. This is the partition which established the state of Israel. 181, so resolution 181 in 1947. Finally, another fallacy. This one looks nice. What do they say? That peace should not demand the uprooting of people, Arab or Jew, from their homes. such a construct, which is more likely to lead to civil unrest, runs counter to the idea of coexistence. So, so this is not even mentioned anyway, that Arabs should be uprooted. The Arabs were uprooted in 1948. These are sitting in the West Bank in their own homes. I, th- I think what they aim for is not to vacate the settlements. They do not want to vacate settlers from settlements. They cover that and wrap it up in a language which sounds like fair to everybody. No Arabs or Jews should be rooted. This is what they're trying to say here. For this reason, even this goes beyond even what Ariel Sharon vacated the settlements in Gaza. So the idea of vacating these settlements is not a sacred thing. Rabin and others said that all the leaders of Israel who negotiated in Oslo had it on their minds that the settlements, this document calls it enclaves. And so the idea of the vacating the settlements was not a strange idea. Now they go beyond what everyone said, including Sharon. Even what the Israeli law itself calls illegal enclaves. Some settlements were established without the government's permission because of their Zionist and religious zeal. They built these establishments.
And I'm going to conclude here, but with regard to sovereignty, when I looked into the concept of sovereignty of state, the most important thing that attracted my attention was a speech by Netanyahu in a university during the Obama rule. He was forced to accept the idea of the Palestinian state. And he spoke to Israeli people. So this was a very, very long lecture, and I have the lecture before me. I just took some excerpts from this lecture. He talked to the right-wing public, and he said that Obama is putting pressure on him, and the way he wrote it or said it is exactly the same as it is drafted in the document. So the most important point is what he said, that he said that terminology is not important. As long as our conditions are accepted with regard to the nature of the state, you do not have to call it a state. He said the approval of the state. And if it is without weapons, and if Israel is in charge of the borders of the security, we can call it a state. We have no problem with that. So this is exactly what had been included in the agreement. So there is something else that I would like to talk about. It is written before you. I'm not going to go back to it due to the time constraint. And there is also some level of boldness, particularly when it comes to the students that are with us here. So there is a theoretical side. All of a sudden you hear them talking about different theories. So what do they say? When he talk about the state and sovereignty. So sovereignty is an amorphous concept that has evolved over time. With growing interdependence, each nation chooses to interact with other nations by entering into agreements So the notion of sovereignty is a static and consistently defined term. It has been an unnecessary stumbling block in past negotiations. So the pragmatic and operational concerns that affect security and prosperity are what is most important. So they say that this is a very agile kind of concept. So what is important is the work, is the employment, and also development. So this is a flexible concept when it comes to the Palestinians, but when it comes to the Israelis, it is not a kind of agile concept. So these are theories only. So all of a sudden, they want to change the concept of sovereignty, the sovereignty of states. So they can talk. This is what they're saying. They're saying that there can be a state without sovereignty. So when we used to say that this is a state that lacks sovereignty. So this is what they say, that we're going to give you a state without sovereignty because it is a stumbling block. So when it comes to sovereignty, so Israel will have sovereignty on the airspace and also the crossings and also water and wells. You cannot dig a well without having the approval of Israelis. So underground water, this is joint property. So the Palestinian underground water is a joint property between the Israelis and the Palestinian territories. And what do they say? What do they give them? So the state of Israel will retain sovereignty over territorial waters which are vital to Israel's security and which provide stability to the region. So what do they say to the Palestinians? After a long paragraph, so it is going to develop new facilities when it comes to the sewage water. This is unbelievable. So when it comes to digging underground wells, this is not acceptable. But you can treat your sewage water. This is what is written here. This is what is written, yes. So throughout the document, they talk about only Israeli security, no talk about Palestinian security. So the idea of enclaves is very important. If you go back to the map once again, please. So on the right-hand side, the idea of enclaves, as you can say, these brown spots on the blue surface. As per the documents, these are under Israeli law. I do not have time to give you excerpts. So it is the Israeli troops that control, that protect these areas, the areas of the Palestinian territories or authority. So when you see those very light lines that lead to the settlements, or also they are under control of the Israeli troops. That is why I have come to the conclusion, dear brothers and sisters, I do not have time at all now left. So this status quo, this situation, it is called an international situation, and this is the way the Israelis see a state by adding some territories to area A and B. If you can go back to the map once again, if you annex areas A and B and you add 20 to 30% from Oslo, this is what is going to constitute the Palestinian state. So I have finished the first part of my lecture. The second and the third parts of my lecture is how we reached what we have reached. The second part, how have we come to what we have reached. So we have the Camp David and Oslo. And the third part, what to do. Because in every lecture I am asked, you do analyze things, but what are we supposed to do? So you can ask me questions about what I have not tackled in my lecture. And may the peace of God be upon you all.
شكرا جزيلا دكتور عزمي على هذه
Thank you so much,
المحاضرة
Dr. Azmi, for this very valuable lecture.
التي في محاولة الإجابة عن سؤال لماذا
This
وصلنا
was
إلى هنا
an
قبل
attempt
استعراض كل
to
المبادرات
answer the
الأمريكية
question,
والمبادرات
how have we
الجاسوسية
reached what we have reached, and you have looked into the different initiatives since 1948 up until the Trump-Netanyahu deal. So I would like to open the floor for questions, but please, due to the time constraint, I would like to try to take as many questions as possible. Please, questions and not speeches or statements. So I'm going to take 3 questions. Mr. Abdullah, go ahead. Abdullah Al-Adba, editor-in-chief of Al-Arab newspaper. I would like to ask Dr. Azmi Bishara, I would like to know your opinion about the coalition between the evangelicals and the second return of the Messiah, and what is the impact on the Republican Party as a political party? Are we in the process of facing a much worse situation if America is forced to step away from the liberals and to become a religious state? Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. Thank you. With regard to the Trump initiative, we are going to have elections in November. If Trump does not win the elections, is the United States of America is going to go to square one, or is it going to continue with the initiative? Mr. Omar, we're going to take this question, and after that we're going to have a second round when we looked into the details of the Trump-Netanyahu deal. It seems very clearly that there is a fear, a state of terror that the Zionist state is feeling. That is why they're looking into securing their state and removing any possibility of the state of Palestine being in charge of its own security. So how can the Palestinian forces make this program, and they can invest in it for it to be a source of terror for the Israeli state? Thank you so much for the question that had been posed by my brother Al-Adba. So this coalition between the churches and Trump is a real one, and they do constitute a social base. And Pence used to be a Catholic and he became a newborn. That is why he is very much fanatical. So he is ideologue. He became so Trump is not ideological. He used to pledge and donate money to the Democrats. I do not think that he had read the document. He doesn't have time to do so. So this is an ideological thing, but their growth in the United States of America, and this goes back and dates back to the Anglican Church in the United States of America. So we're not talking about the Lutheran Church, we're talking about the Anglican Church in Britain. There is a trend that they think about the First Testament, and this dates back to Henry VIII, and this is what I wrote in my book. So he did not find any document whereby he would base his kingdom, and that is why he based it on the Old Testament. So Martin Luther is the contrary altogether. So Henry VIII had this trend, and the Anglican Church, some of it, particularly the dissident churches, have developed it. They have developed it gradually, because This is a very, very long topic, but very, very briefly, because it is very important indeed. So they looked into the Promised Land and also the Virgin Lands in the United States of America. So the dissident churches in the United States, I'm not talking about the mainstream Anglican Church, because most of them, they are very much compassionate to the Palestinian states, but in the United States of America, they were forced to use terminology of the Old Testament when it comes to settlement. They used terms such as the Virgin Territories, and these terms, they have used them in the settlement, and this was very much consolidated and established in their culture. When you listen to their speeches, you would find so many terms that date back or that are very much linked to the Old Testament. In the investigation groups that came to Palestine, they came before, and there were a number of groups that came, and they used Zionist terminologies. So the colonials used to come to look into those territories, and they would present it to the government of the king. So those surveys, and we have had so many people that used to donate that were part of this expedition, of this adventure. It used to be considered an adventure because you wouldn't know whether you would be able to come back or not. And the guide that they used to use is the Old Testament. And I think that this had impacted politics. I have written about that, but I did not have enough documents. And the sister of Balfour wrote about it, and I think she impacted Balfour, and saying that the Jews should go back to their historic homeland. When we sit and we analyze the different interests and the Suez Canal, there are things that they have been brought up with. The Jews have been brought up with these things. So this exists. There is no doubt about it. So their mobilization for the elections, these are not only voters, these are people that go and vote. These people register themselves and vote. So they are organized, and I do think that this is very important indeed. What is really strange, because we do not know much about it, and this is justified, but the different delegations that come to Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from the United States are from those groups, so they are welcomed by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I do not know whether they know their political culture or not. I do not know, but so the mainstream churches, such as the Presbyterians, their position is not like this one at all. There are a number of official churches that have positions that are very much for the rights of the Palestinians, and there are so many churches that do not delve in politics. They have their own charitable organizations, and the other ones are militants, and they're taking the matter very, very seriously. So theologically speaking, in its essence, it is against the Jews. So in terms of position, they are with the Israelis, but in essence, they are against the Jews. When Messiah comes back to Palestine, they all will become Christians. So the second question. So the Trump initiative in case he does not win the elections, this is a very important question. Up to now, and this is not a binding document to any party, so we should not become terrorized. It is an American initiative. It is not an agreement. There are so many initiatives that have made it to the surface and then disappeared. But what is distinctive about this document, it is based on a cumulative kind of effort. But these are initiatives. Each president would come up with an initiative, and once he leaves, his initiative would disappear. It is not as dangerous as it seems. But when it comes to Jerusalem, so do you think that another president that would come to office would retreat from such kind of position, which is having the American embassy in Jerusalem? Because the majority of Congress, there are certain matters that they can retreat from, but others no. But the impact is very negative indeed, and it is going to have a negative impact on any other president to come, because there are precedents that have been established. Certain parts might change, but there are certain things that have been consolidated and established. This is when it comes to presidents, but the other impacts are to continue. Such as the conviction of the Israeli people that the language of force can be useful, and after the insistence and intransigence from the part of the Israelis, these have been accepted by the great power, because at the end of the day, insistence, intransigence can be to some avail. So there is a difference between this one and another president and threaten Israel that they're going to cut the loans given to Israel. George Bush said, I am the president of the United States of America. You, with your lobbies, do you defy me? I'm going to stop the guarantees of those loans, $10 billion. So yes, the United States of America was an ally, but there was a base level when it comes to distance. That is why I do think that there are going to be negative impacts and repercussions to remain, but the initiative in itself is not going to be binding unless the coming president is Trump himself. With regard to the second question, or third question, what to do? So maybe this was supposed to be the last part of my intervention, and I'm not going to expand very much on it. So with this initiative or without this initiative, so the important thing when it comes to it, this initiative, is that it is an awakening for us, and there is a dead end that we do face. It had proven that the pathway that was taken by the Palestinian leaderships had not led to anywhere. It has led us to where we are now. Personally, I think that this is the reasonable outcome of Oslo. We were a small number of people who were against Oslo, particularly during the time when people were talking about peace and Arafat, who signed the Oslo Accord in Washington, he was not. And we used to say that this was a trap for you to look or to care for an authority without a state. And I am not going to claim, but we use the term Bantustan, similar to the Bantustans of South Africa. When the apartheid system wanted to get rid of so many Africans, they called them kingdoms and not states. So you can call yourself whatever you want to call yourself. So in those Bantustans, so many of them are kings. So this was a way to put an end to the demographic burden, and this had alleviated and reduced the number of black Africans. And we used to think then that this is going to lead us where we are now. When you create an authority without a state, when you create authority, you do create conflict and clash for that authority. The second day you create an authority, we have two authorities as a result of this situation. So when people our brothers, people who strived in Fatah movement, when they woke up to this document. So they found themselves really, really thinking about who is going to come after Abu Mazen. So they are busy with these matters. This is what is called authority. When you accept to have an authority without a state, this is a trap. And when the marginalize the PLO and all what you care about and all your stakes, you put them on the White House. Had you not do that, this document would not have shaken you, because you did bet on the White House. So that is why we have not seen any importance given to so many of the countries such as India or Africa or any other countries. All what we bet on was the United States. So when you have lost all the public opinion of the whole world, yes, you were able to get the support of Pakistan, but you lost India. But this liberation movement was a symbol of all third world countries, including the Islamic world, that was of great deal of support to us. So this is the pathway. This is what has happened. So if this negative impact would awaken the Palestinians with regard to the negative points or the mistakes of this pathway. So here Oslo had been cancelled. There is no revolutionary work that would lead to the cancellation of Oslo. Israel did so. So if you can get us the chart on the settlements, Oslo, when we were discussing matters with our brothers in Fatah movement, these are not traitors. No, they are not traitors. They wanted to establish a state. They were exerting a lot of effort to establish a state. They said that we have accepted Oslo in order to stop settlements. So settlements have increased 5 times as a result of Oslo. So this is after 1967. So these are the first settlements. Look at the settlements. 77, 87, 118 settlements. 1997, 126 settlements. This is the year after the Oslo Accord. Look at the jump. 126 settlements. So this is the expansion. So settlements before Oslo were much less because there were revolutions, uprisings. So the largest freeze of settlements took place during the uprising. So the PLO became hostage, unable to strive. That is why we have seen the expansion of settlements. So there are certain parts that I have written myself and it had been published. I'm not saying this for the first time. They were Palestinians who were aware of that, Mr. Abdul Hamid Siam and some others who were against Oslo. Some of you who are sitting here who were against Oslo, the picture was very, very clear. We just needed to be bold to say that. So that is why we have to be aware of that it has come to an end, So now, what are the new means of strife? I listened to the speeches by Abu Mazen in the League of Arab Spring. He talked about the disbandment of the authority. So, if he disbands it, is it a scouting team or group? We're talking about 100,000 of employees. We have 100,000 security men. How are you going to do that? Are you going to ask them to go home? So, are people going to be able to live without having the utilities and all what is needed? So What does it mean? I have invited Israel. What Israel is going to say? Yes, thank you for the invitation, but we are not coming. In the United Nations, he said, I invited Israel to come back and to regain its responsibilities. But Israel is going to say, thank you for the invitation, and we are not going to come back. So if you disband the authority, nobody is going to respond. And Israel would find some security men to come and take your position, unfortunately. That is why a few days ago I've written a few lines. These remain municipalities, but they should understand and respect the borders. Yes, you have to manage matters of the people. So you are going to remain as a municipality and not the leadership of the Palestinians, and you have to revive the PLO. That was considered as a reference for their power, for their authority. So, to revive it, or either through a national congress or conference, and Algeria, this is not, I'm not saying this because the ambassador is here, is left. So you can go to the conferences that were held in Algeria. You can have something similar to the African Congress or conference, and then aim to have Jews in the long run because if this armed movement stops, you have to work with both parties. But when we look into the changes that have happened, all this generation has come to an end. Thousands of Palestinians want to contribute, and nobody tells them how they can do so. Thousands of Palestinians are outside all these frameworks. They do not have anything to do. They want to contribute. They want to do something. And for us to start resisting this project. So Palestine, it's a colonial issue. It is the last colonial issue in our region. And here lies the symbolic importance of this cause. Most people sitting here are not Palestinians. So they have more problems in Syria than they have. So some have refugees, Syrian refugees, more than they have Palestinian refugees. But with regard to them, Palestine is important because it is the last colonial cause, and it is the case or the cause of the Ummah. So the Syrians' cause is Syria. The Iraqis' main cause is Iraq. Yes, we are not the chosen people. We have a problem with the chosen people. We are not God's chosen people. So Arab nations, Arab homelands, they have their problems. But when we meet, all of us as an ummah, our main cause is the Palestinian cause, because it is one of the most important components of our nation. Yes, the risk, the threat of Israel is on all Arabs. Yes, the same idea, in the same document. Look at the number of conditions that are imposed on both Egypt and Jordan in the same document. The whole region is being rearranged, redesigned in keeping with the interests of the Israelis. So this is the logic of Israel. They want the states to be sectarian states because Israel is not a nation state, it is a sectarian state. So these are the convictions. We have to deal with Arab nations and their issues, and we have to be in harmony with the democratic trend. So this is a colonial apartheid case, similar to the South African case. My own view, the issue or the matter is not a state. So there is a state. If you want a state, take a state. So this is the state. We have what is called fetishism, state fetishism, as Marx calls it. So when the merchandise becomes viable, we have been insisting on having a state. This is a state. Yes, take the state. So our issue is liberation. So how do you draft it as part of a federal state or two-state? This can be discussed, but we have to face the apartheid system, racial system in Palestine, and the discourse should be a democratic discourse. You cannot wage a war with an authoritarian, racial, colonial regime with an authoritarian discourse. In the whole world, nobody's going to be persuaded. You have to have a democratic discourse, and you have to stand with the democratic systems in the Arab world and not the authoritarian regimes. And if you cannot do that, keep silent. You cannot support and interact with authoritarian regimes. You can keep silent, and everybody is going to appreciate and understand where you are or your position. In my opinion, I think we need to have a strategic change, and the option is resistance. Yes, this is the option, resistance. Historically, I look at Palestine as one unit that would be under the same racial authoritarian. Whether we talk about the Arabs of 67 or Jerusalem, we have to look at it in this way. And consequently, the Palestinians have to take into account Palestinians in all areas of existence for them to take part in the battle against the apartheid system or regime. So this should be the direction before us. When you come and propose a solution for a part of Palestinian people on a part of Palestine, this is really strange. So the liberation movement is a movement of refugees, historically speaking. So the national liberation movement started from the diaspora. So it was formed as a movement of refugees. We forget about the diaspora and we do concentrate on the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And now we have all these entities separate from each other. And each one of those areas have their own circumstances, and we have to take each one into account. This is the division or the dismantlement of Palestine. Anything else, you have to ask the factions and the political parties, and I do not want to establish any of the two. When you do, you have to have a program and strategic plans, and those who have established those factions and political parties should tell us. I can intellectually analyze the matter and say this is the pathway. Other than that, I'm not required to do anything else. When the PLO, when they use it as a tool and nobody hears about it, only in the Palestinian Authority, and then they would talk about it only on occasions. And the Palestinians who live outside Palestine, what are they supposed to do? To have a new organization, an alternative or a substitute for the PLO? This is the accusation, then this is the charge. And this is the dilemma that we are facing. We have to look into it because they have come to a dead end. They themselves reached the dead end. Yes, it is true what our pathway in the past was wrong. Yes, what has led you to Oslo, of course, was wrong. There were mistakes that have led you to Oslo, including the armed resistance. So, the strategy after Oslo also was wrong. So, talking and using this discourse, saying what they wanted, I gave them what they wanted, and consequently I got this. Are you proud to say that, to give them what they wanted? Are you saying that in all pride? You should be embarrassed when you say, I gave them what they wanted. You should not feel proud. It seems that he has not reached the right conclusions so far. This is the right answer. So I'm going to take a last round of questions. Okay. So maybe something that we have not talked about.
Please just make it a pointed question, no statements. Thank you, Dr. Azmi, for your presentation. My question is, in political science, when we redesignate the whole affair, what was uniting the Arabs after Oslo was the Arab nationalism. Now, is it this deal that's uniting us? And all what's happening is just expressions of regret? How can we, for example, benefit from the business community and the Palestinians in diaspora? This is another form of the question, what to do next. Ashraf, are the Arabs who accepted this deal are part of the solution, or will it be left to the Palestinians only to resist it? Good evening, Dr. Azmi. Thank you for this first-class presentation. My question is, how can we turn this calamity to something more positive, hopefully? From this point onwards, in your opinion and in your experience and your political activism, what's the end game for the Israelis? All what they did was, in the end, to put the Palestinian population in a bigger prison. The Israelis, after all, are not stupid. They have this horrendous apartheid regime, and the Palestinians inside are nothing but a time bomb. They know there is an explosion to come in the future. Are they preparing for a big bang of some sort? And secondly, my opinion of the PLO, the Palestinian National Authority, PNA, we have a precedent. We can dissolve that. Like in Gaza, this happened. It was replaced by another authority, albeit a municipality, as you describe it. But where is the position now of the Arab countries who will provide an alternative? These are the last three questions. We have no time for more. Do you consider the unified leadership a role in making the first Intifada failure, and was the Madrid process the beginning of the failure for the Palestinian side? Mahmoud Abbas was talking about that the security coordination with Israel. Can Mahmoud Abbas do that? And also normalization in the area. Why there is now a disagreement in rejecting this deal, but the previous Arab peace initiative was supported by all Arab countries? We cannot hear the questions without a microphone. Thank you for your questions. We cannot hear the gentleman. Yes, I agree. We should call it the Trump-Netanyahu deal. Okay. I appreciate that we are running late and people want to go home. Please, if you want to leave, by all means, feel free. I don't want you to feel that you should stay despite your other engagements or anything like that. The Arab nationalism question, our problem with this concept, the Arab pan nationalism, is when it's ideologized. It doesn't need that. What unites us is our Arab identity, our language, our culture, like we are all gathered here this evening. It's a reality. It's an existing reality. I think the East and the West and Israel are mistaken when they ignore us. I think the last resurgence was the Arab revolutions, not the Arab political parties. Why has that Arab revolution spread throughout the Arab world? Because there are commonalities, historical, emotional, religious, language, everything. When the Arab pan-nationalism as a concept was ideologized and politicized and turned into political parties has done harm more than good. If it was left to be as a common feeling and passions amongst people, you'll see it would have been much better. For this reason, I'll always bank on it, on the one condition that my Arabism is a cultural thing, not ideological. Of course, where else can the Arabs go? Where can the Palestinians go? This is their environment. This is their country. Of course, Syria, Jordan, and others are closer than maybe Morocco and Algeria, but we are still united by the same language, and this is the pan-Arabism that I understand, not the ideology. Maybe the ideology has alienated some Arabs and non-Arabs who were feeling closely associated with Arabs. This is one thing. As for the reaction, will the reaction stay as it is? We will see. Give it some time. Let things develop. The Arab street needs some time to come up with a response to this program by Trump. This will develop gradually. I think the lack of response on recognizing Jerusalem as a capital surprised me more than the response to this initiative. I mean, let's be realistic. What can I expect from the Lebanese or the Iraqis or the Syrians? The Iraqis lose 5, 6 people every day in peaceful demonstrations. Maybe under the current circumstances, this is the maximum I can expect from people, but eventually, at the end of the day, everything hinges on an organized Palestinian national liberation movement which has a proper leadership which can inspire everybody. But if an Arab person wakes up every morning only to hear that a Hamas spokesperson said this and the Palestinian Authority spokesperson said that, as if the struggle is between Palestinians, nothing will be achieved. As a question by Ashraf, I forgot what he said. No, they are concerned. Like usual, the Arabs they use this affair as a card in their relations with the United States. The Palestinian question is a sort of a card which can have, like the ones who play cards and cheat at the same time. You use it as a card with the Americans to edge closer to the Americans by claiming that I'm close to the Palestinians, I'll bring them down to the table. And at the same time, they are just say and pretend before their own peoples who call for more human rights and democracy that this is not the time because this is diverting our attention of serving the Palestinian cause. It's instrumentalizing the Palestinian cause, nothing more, nothing less, whether in the relations with the United States or in the relations with their own people. And this was part of the reasons why we got to where we are now. And you must have seen the countries that supported this deal, they supported it before it was announced. Whether the great brainstorming which was held in Manama, all the geniuses who sat there, headed by the genius Kushner, the genius economist, how he was lecturing people on how to live and how to do this and that. Kushner, of course, he lectured them and gained their admiration. The genius child who teaches us how to, we as Arabs cannot know how to live. We do not know how to live because his father is a millionaire, so therefore he should teach us. He went to Harvard only because his father donated a few $1,000,000 to the university. The Arabs are concerned, of course. I think the session by the Arab League yesterday was very illustrative. Maybe this is good for our students. When I say that their collective behavior, how different it was from their individual stances. When they individually accepted and supported this initiative and called on the Palestinians, and I think the Egyptians called for delving deeply into this initiative before taking any stance vis-a-vis this initiative. But when they got together, they voted against it. When they have to behave as an Arab nation, they have to behave like this because there is an existential contradiction between the Arabs as a nation and as Israel. But as individual countries, I'm not talking about Israel as Jewish people. I'm talking about Israel as a Zionist, racist entity. The Arab element is very essential here, and we should really confirm its importance. When I say the Syrians or the Iraqis or the Egyptians, when we talk to them in the language used by us lately, when to say that Israel better than them, why are we saying that? Why are we saying that? Maybe there is a positive side to this, that Israel is the worst thing in the world and these are worse than the worst. But what is latently embedded in this is promoting Israel by saying Israel is a democracy. When you want to take a stand against Arab despotism, then you don't need to promote Israel. If you want to stand against Iran, why should you praise Israel? I don't understand this dichotomy. Israel is not going to fight Iran for your sake. I don't understand this. There is a Ministry of State for Foreign Affairs in a country close to us. This is all. He always says Iran, Iran, Iran is the enemy. Israel is not a problem. Israel is not our enemy. Why is he obsessed with this? He has nothing better to do but to say, okay, he says Iran is an enemy. Iran is an enemy. Why don't we say Iran is an enemy and Israel is an enemy? Why say Iran is an enemy but Israel is not? This is something we should not let go. Even our Egyptian brothers who are so angry, please, we say to them, do not say this. If you want to curse the Syrian regime, for example, praise Israel in comparison. Let us agree on the principles of democracy and get it. We are together. We are against occupation and against despotism and oppression. There is no contradiction. You cannot be really against occupation unless you're a Democrat and uphold the symbols of democracy. Gone are the days people who used to speak the language of Mao Zedong or others. No longer, you cannot fight Israel using this discourse. You will lose all support in the world. You should employ a democratic discourse. You should not leave Israel use the language of democracy and you want to use an oppressive language. You thought you will leave and come back to find me gone, but here I am, still here talking. As for Tamer, I thank you, but you confirmed what I said. When you dissolved the authority in Gaza, you replaced it with another authority. In Gaza, the authority was not dissolved. It was taken over by one side against the other. Hamas is an authority too. It provides electricity, water, etc. When we blame Hamas for anything is when you occupied yourself with such details. Leave people who can do that and occupy yourselves with the real struggle. Nobody in the 21st century can live according to the law of the jungle. Sometimes Palestinian intellectuals are angry. They say the authority should be dissolved. No, but should revisit its principles. It should wage and underline the main points of its national struggle. But people who should engage in this struggle should not be involved in agreements with Israel and with their hands tied up. Let the principalities engage in agreements over the use of electricity or groundwater or ports. You should free yourself of that and engage in struggle. Thank you very much for your question. As the first Intifada, Madrid, in fact, we have books and studies and research papers on the first Intifada. The first Intifada did not fail. It ended. It came to the end of its natural life, if we can say that. But the important thing is the international order which gave birth to PLO. The Iraqi occupation of Kuwait put an end to that, and then the collapse of the Soviet Union and the immigration of Soviet Jews caused a real economic bloom in Israel. And also, when the Intifada changed into an armed struggle, the first Intifada caused a lot of embarrassment to Israel. Was an unarmed people engaging in struggle against an occupation power. When the Intifada turned into an armed struggle. It became an armed struggle with Israel. At the same time, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the war on Iraq came, and after the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait came the Bush initiative. But the Arabs, the 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 Arabs should have responded to George Bush. Why should you join you in the liberation of Kuwait without doing something for the Palestine? His answer came to the Madrid peace process. The ones who went to the Madrid conference were the representatives of the first Intifada, Haidar Abdel Shafi. They all took part in the first Intifada. They went there as the representatives of the Palestinians. The danger, or the mistake rather, in the Madrid conference, in my opinion, lies in the disbanding of the joint Palestinian-Jordanian delegation. I wrote about this at the time, but I was in a minority at that time. When they went on their own to Madrid without recognition of the PLO, and when there was insistence on the joint delegation, Palestinian-Jordanian, it was the delegates were approved by the PLO. The problem was Yasser Arafat, with the way he is and the disputes, when he thinks himself he is the sole representative, and also the independence of the political decision, and he is the sole legitimate representative, he insisted to disband the joint Palestinian-Jordanian delegation. So what happened as a result? They signed an agreement on their own. If the joint Jordanian-Palestinian was negotiating, they would be negotiating until today. But this disengagement from the Jordan went on its own and signed its own peace agreement. Secondly, why did you insist on negotiating? You are the Palestine Liberation Organization. Why should you sign a self-rule agreement? Let the intellectuals from the areas, people who live there, let them sign it. Why should the Palestine Liberation Organization ties itself down with such agreements, have this fetishism of the authority, or to say I'm involved and I'm recognized? If the PLO, as a body representing the struggle, free from the shackles of any agreements with Israel, could stay as it was, why Yasser Arafat should get involved and become captive to it and then be killed afterwards? I thank you very much. I wanted to say this in the second part, but I didn't have time for. Now, as for the security coordination and that, this is the last question, I don't know. First of all, the decision to put an end to the security coordination is possible, but anybody who takes such a decision should be prepared for the consequences and to stand up. Because when Yasser Arafat decided that, he decided to take up arms. Oslo means, for Israelis, is the security coordination. If you refer back to the text of all the Oslo agreements and the text of this vision of Trump and Netanyahu, you will find in every other sentence a mention of Israel's security. Putting an end to security, yes, it can be done from tomorrow. Don't hold meetings, be it ally with the Israeli intelligence. We can do that. but they should be prepared to a confrontation with Israel. I hope that they are able. Until now, there is a danger in the Palestinian cause. There was indoctrination of the security forces under the General Dayton, who came after the Second Intifada to rehabilitate the Palestinian security forces, and he indoctrinated them as their number one enemy was terrorism and not Israel, of course. But is this how the Palestinian leadership is thinking now? We cannot hear the comments without a microphone. For this reason, I'm saying, if this authority should turn into some sort of a civil administration to run the affairs of the population, yes. So in that case, it should not be involved in any security arrangements. But this requires real national it's easy to say these things, but it has conditions. When Mahmoud Abbas said, I sent a letter to the Israelis and the Americans, I didn't take this seriously, really. What does this mean? If you don't give us a state, we will have our own state. So if Israel does not approve what you already called for, what good will anything you say do now? This is just rhetoric. This needs a different discourse. It also it needs getting together all the Palestinian leaders from throughout the world and have a security apparatus which does not fulfill this function of security coordination. The Palestinian people feel that even diplomatically you do not confront Israel, let alone about any other thing. For this reason, if the Palestinian people is treated respectfully and felt that its leadership are principled, they will respond. Now we went beyond just watch out for what was said in the first. Now we are set. I'm not calling for demonstrations. This is what he said. What harm will there be if the Palestinian president went out of demonstrations? He could say he is not responsible if the Palestinian youth go on demonstrations. The Palestinian people are not stupid. They did not hear a call for demonstrations. All when he says that I sent a letter to the Israelis, what does that mean? He did not take a confrontational line with the Israelis. If he was to do that, when Yasser Arafat came back from Camp David, he said no to America, and he knew this would cost him a price. He said that to me, amongst others. He started getting ready for the confrontation. He knew when he said no to Clinton for the final solution issues, he prepared for the worst. Of course, all the Arab countries blamed him, not publicly, of course. They all said, how can you say no to Clinton? He's the American president. But he started getting ready for the confrontation, the demonstrations in the Aqsa and others. And when when the Palestinian security forces got engaged in confrontations because they felt that. Once again, I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much, Dr. Azmi, for this valuable